Welcome back to a new episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live. I'm Raham Morsi and I'll be presenting tonight's show. And usually we have a number of different segments involving politics, business and some sports news, maybe technology and culture. But given the circumstances that are taking place right now in the region, our main focus will be on the political arena and what's happening in the Gaza Strip. We're going to take a short break and take a look at what's happening there right now. And starting off with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Saturday receiving a phone call from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Presidential spokesman Councillor Ahmed Fahmy said the phone call tackled the ongoing diplomatic efforts aimed at halting the escalation in the Gaza Strip. They also tackled the UN General Assembly's recent resolution, which called for an immediate humanitarian truce, which has not yet been achieved, to save the lives of innocent civilians and allow them access for emergency aid in the Strip. Guterres praised Egypt's role when maintaining regional peace and stability. And earlier, the UN Secretary General had said he was surprised by Israel's escalation of bombardments in the Strip, which still continues until today, and repeated for a call for the immediate humanitarian ceasefire that has yet to be heeded. Addressing the ongoing violence in the Gaza Strip, as well as the recent incidents that took place earlier in the week in Taba and Nuweiba, President al-Sisi said on Saturday, or warned rather, against any expansion of the conflict in Gaza, saying the region risked becoming a ticking time bomb. The President, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, also stressed that Egypt's sovereignty should be respected after drones were intercepted after entering Egyptian airspace. Speaking at the IMCE opening session, the President reaffirmed Egypt is fully capable of protecting itself amid the risk of regional escalation from the Israeli aggression against Gaza. President al-Sisi pointed out that these events are clear indicators of the dire consequences of the current escalations in Gaza. Furthermore, the President had expressed his gratitude to the countries that have sent humanitarian aid in an attempt to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. Joining us over the phone to tell us more about these quotes from the President is Dr. Raouf Ghaffar, a political analyst. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, my dear.
Sir, can you tell us a bit of what you thought of the conversation between President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the UN Chief of Guterres, and the fact that they spoke last Saturday about a humanitarian ceasefire and a humanitarian corridor, and until today this has not been achieved despite many countries around the world calling for it?
Unfortunately, Israel lost it. I mean, they don't listen to anybody. They are really, their atrocity is beyond the description. They don't have, and this is my opinion, they don't know what humanity is. So one could not expect them to understand that people need humanitarian help, because apparently they stopped being human beings.
Yes.
That is why they cannot understand, they cannot listen, they cannot
dehumanize. The point is they're dehumanizing the Palestinian people, not that
Absolutely. I mean, there is no comparison between their might and force and the completely helpless women and children that are being slaughtered every day. And as I say, under the pretext that they are looking for Hamas elements, and this is completely untrue, in my, again, opinion. There are so many ways to chase criminals, if they call them criminals, rather than killing 100 people to look for one criminal. So, as I repeat,
yes.
What we see on the ground has nothing to do with humanity, has nothing to do with human rights. And something very pathetic.
Yes.
And what makes us even more nauseated, I'm sorry to use such terms, is that the Western world,
Western leaders,
very
yes, the
few
complete
exceptions,
backing of this
is
situation.
backing them all the way. I mean,
Sir, my question here, I mean, the president actually spoke about the idea that if the situation continues and continues to escalate, as we're seeing right now, it doesn't seem like the Israelis are planning to slow down at any point. In fact, they're increasing the aggression. The president said that we are reaching a point of a ticking time bomb when it comes to regional security as well as international security. With what has happened today, specifically with certain countries cutting off ties with Israel and other groups outright saying that they are at war with the Israelis, do you believe that the rest of the world, or specifically the Western Hemisphere, may heed that this escalation, if it continues on, it truly will get out of hand and create a complete disaster within the region, security-wise?
Of course. I mean, they have to come to their senses. I think they are brainwashed. They are blinded. I cannot understand. I mean, when we were young, they told us, they used to tell us, you go and study abroad because they can teach you ethics and they can teach you, and they have been chewing on human rights and what have you. I don't want to go into details. And when it comes to the Palestinians, I cannot fathom how they look at human rights when we're talking Palestinians. And this is what makes us really sad. Of course, escalation might, God forbid, take us to a region, to a place where nobody wants to go there. But it is time that the civilized world come to its senses and start to realize that what is happening is something really unprecedented and has to stop one way or the other. And even if Israel does not listen, when the world community, I mean, we have seen
but internally, sir,
the whole world now is protesting, and we're seeing.
I apologize for cutting you off there, but internally as well, there is a divide amongst the Israelis when it comes to what's happening right now. In a sense that some don't want, I mean, when it comes to do with the hostages, they basically, some of them don't want the excessive escalations when it comes to the Israeli IDF towards bombing Gaza because they fear for their families and the safety of the hostages there. Do you believe that the very far-right extremist government of Benjamin Netanyahu may come to an end due to what has happened directly with violence and aggression?
In my opinion, he is on as we say, on a hot tin roof. He is now at stake. His government is at stake. He is, I mean, almost on the verge of collapsing. And I think that what he's doing, he is trying to gain time and to gain some grounds because he is losing popularity by the hour within Israel. And even the government itself is divided between itself. And as you said, half the Israeli people are not happy and they not consent with what their government is doing. So I think that Mr.
The end of this government, basically,
is trying to gain some time and trying to sort of find a way out, in a way to keep his post, because apparently if he goes down, he will not be left alone and he would be put to trial, etc., etc. So he doesn't want this to happen. So that is why he is doing what he's doing. Unfortunately.
Yes. Well. Yes. Dr. Rauf Ghaffar, a political analyst, thank you so much for joining us over the phone and giving us your take on the president's remarks when it comes to regional security. We're going to take a short break and move on with more news about what's happening here within the Middle East region. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli visited Al Arish in northern Sinai on Tuesday and during which he met with the head of the Northern Sinai Tribes Union, Sinai elders and chiefs of tribes, as well as a number of media personnel, politicians and public figures. Madbouli vowed that Egypt would not recede any part of Sinai and would launch a second phase of development in northern Sinai, where a strong infrastructure has been laid down already. Here's the story. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli visited northern Sinai on Tuesday, during which he met with the head of the North Sinai Tribes Union, chiefs and elders of the Sinai tribes, as well as a number of media personnel, politicians and public figures. The Prime Minister also laid the foundation stone for the number of urban societies. During his visit to Al Arish, at the headquarters of the Battalion 101, Madbouli affirmed that the state would launch the second phase of the Northern Sinai development, in which a strong infrastructure had been laid down there. He said such a strategic decision had been taken to develop Sinai in parallel with combating terrorism. The Prime Minister said Sinai had been a bastion for resistance against aggression attempts against Egypt throughout history. He stressed that liquidating any issue on the expense of Egyptian lands would not be allowed. He said 1,000 projects had been implemented on the peninsula with a cost of over 290 billion Egyptian pounds, adding that £363 billion scheme over 5 years is being implemented. Madbouli said the projects cover many fields, including health and higher education, adding that Northern Sinai residents will be able to find many job opportunities during the next period. The Prime Minister described the volume of projects planned for Northern Sinai as 3 times that of the High Dam project. Madbouli said 270,000 fidans are planned for reclamation in Northern Sinai, while £115 billion are allocated to establish 21 housing projects in the area. He noted that an industrial zone is planned for Sinai, including projects worth billions of pounds. According to Madbouli, Northern Sinai is to be the site of international standard tourist projects and will be an investment destination for investors from around the world. He said a road network of the highest standards will be implemented in Sinai. Added that linking Northern Sinai with Egyptian lands everywhere is underway with the aim of aborting any foreign ambitions. Madbouli said Egypt would be an international logistics center with a giant railway network. He also said that Arish port would be developed into an international port with the capacity to compete with other Egyptian ports. The Premier further added that plans are forwarded to establish logistics and free zones in northern Sinai to serve trade movements with neighboring countries and for the area to be a giant investment, industrial and housing center in Egypt. In a press conference in Rafah, Prime Minister Madbouli said Egypt is against any targeting of civilians and added that Egypt is against collective punishment against civilians in Gaza. He reiterated that Egypt is keen to deliver all humanitarian aid to Gaza and the region will not achieve peace without the two-state solution. Madbouli stressed that Egypt would not accept the liquidation of the Palestinian cause at its expense or at that of any other country. He asserted Egypt's total rejection of collective punishment of the Palestinian people, including the residents of the Gaza Strip, asserting that Egypt is in contact at all levels to face the unprecedented humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He confirmed that Egypt would not recede any part of the Sinai Peninsula and is keen on developing it for the sake of the nation. Madbouli said Sinai had witnessed unprecedented development and investment. The Prime Minister vowed that Egypt would not allow a destabilization of any part of the nation. For their part, the chiefs and elders of Sinai expressed full support for President al-Sisi. The governors of northern Sinai said the government is keen on developing the peninsula. At a press statement held at the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing with Gaza, the Prime Minister called upon all world leaders to denounce targeting civilians, deploring the loss of over 8,500 lives in Gaza due to the Israeli strikes. Madbouli thanked international government and non-government organizations that have sent humanitarian aid to Palestinians in the Strip to enter through the Rafah crossing. The head Head of the State Information Service, Diar Rashwan, held a press conference at the Rafah border crossing in Egypt on Sunday. He said actions in Gaza have exceeded the concept of self-defense on the part of the Israelis. He also said the Palestinian people do not accept to be displaced outside their homeland, adding that the right to resist is stipulated under international law. Rashwan said 258 trucks have so far passed the Gaza through the Rafah border crossing from Egypt. Still in the Rafah border, a new convoy of 60 trucks of aid are ready to enter the Gaza Strip via the crossing. The convoy, the largest of its kind since the start of the Israeli aggression in the besieged Strip in 25 days, is part of Egypt's efforts to have a turning point in the aid file in coordination with international and civil society organizations and institutions. The move came as international aid shipments kept converging in on Al Arish International Airport that will be inspected, then sent to the border, and then sent into Gaza. According to the UN Office for Coordination of the Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, some 33 trucks carrying water, food, and medical supplies had entered Gaza on Sunday through the Rafah border crossing. Israeli troops pushed deeper into the Gaza Strip Tuesday, driving tanks and armored bulldozers through the rubble of shattered buildings. As Israel stepped up its relentless bombing of Gaza, desperate Palestinian families scrambled through debris, searching for survivors. This comes as Israeli airstrikes killed hundreds of civilians in North Gaza's refugee camp of Jabalia, according to the health ministry there. Here's the story.
Israeli occupation army footage showed soldiers advancing through a bomb-scarred landscape with buildings reduced to a mangled mess of stone and twisted metal by weeks of withering air and artillery strikes. Israel said it had struck 300 targets during the fourth night of land operations in Gaza, where troops came under Hamas anti-tank and machine gun fire after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dismissed mounting international calls for a ceasefire. The bombing campaign has killed 8,525 people, according to Hamas, many of them children. The humanitarian toll has sparked a global backlash, with aid groups and the United Nations saying time is running out for many of the territory's 2.4 million people denied access to food, water, fuel, and medicine. Surgeons are conducting amputations on hospital floors without anesthetic, and children are forced to drink salty water, according to Jean-François Corti, the vice president of Médecins Sans Frontières, which has 20 staff on the ground. Israel has accused Hamas of using hospitals as military headquarters and civilians as human shields, charges the Hamas dismissed as baseless propaganda. Netanyahu has said posing attacks now would be what he called surrender to Hamas, who are responsible for raids on Israeli homes, farms, and villages. The Israeli government said the insurgents scored an early victory with the rescue of Private Ori Megidish, an Israeli soldier in Hamas captivity who was reunited with her family. She hasn't yet appeared publicly since the IDF says they freed her. Hamas on Monday released a video of 3 female hostages seated against a tile wall. One urged Israel to agree to a Hamas-demanded prisoner swap. Netanyahu dismissed the clip, the time and place of which couldn't be verified, as cruel psychological propaganda, as even Israel's staunchest allies voiced concern about the dire humanitarian crisis in southern Gaza. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, said there was not nearly enough aid to meet the unprecedented needs. Israel said it is inspecting cargo to make sure weapons are not being smuggled in and is monitoring to guarantee supplies are not seized by Hamas. Meanwhile, fears are mounting the violence could spiral into a broader regional war, with the White House warning Israel's enemies, in particular Iran, allied groups, not to get involved.
after the bombing of the Jabalia refugee camp, where hundreds of Palestinians have died, according to the health ministry there, in addition to the other hundreds who are still underneath the rubble that are at the Jabalia refugee camp. A number of events have taken place, including the New York-based United Nations human rights official, Craig Haber, the director of the New York office of OHCHR, had resigned over the organization's response to the situation in Gaza, which he described as textbook case of genocide. Also, Bolivia severed diplomatic ties with Israel, citing crimes against humanity. And this is as Bolivia's government breaks diplomatic ties with the Israelis. The Bolivian Foreign Ministry said just today, accusing Israel of committing crimes against humanity in the Gaza Strip. Also in Bolivia, in 2009, had cut diplomatic ties with Israel in protest of its attacks of the Gaza Strip as well. And in 2020, the government's president of Jeanine Áñez re-established the ties. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting upon the request of the United Arab Emirates to discuss the developments of the Gaza Strip. Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian UN ambassador, urged the Security Council to follow the General Assembly and its paralysis and demand an end to the bloodshed, which constitutes an affront to humanity, war crimes and crimes against humanity, in addition to a clear and imminent danger to the regional and international peace and security. This comes as the U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield had urged the divided Security Council, which has rejected 4 resolutions that would have responded to the ongoing Gaza war, to come together, saying the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is growing more dire day by day. Stressing that the innocent civilians must be protected, she said the Council must call for an immediate unconditional release of the hostages and address the immense humanitarian needs of the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, all while the Foreign Secretary Blinken says a ceasefire will not happen anytime soon. Felipe Lazzarini warned during an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council on Monday that a further breakdown of civil order will make it extremely difficult for the largest UN agency in Gaza to continue operating. Here's the story.
When Gaza's Indonesian hospital received a sudden influx of patients badly injured by Israeli bombing on Tuesday, medics set up an operating room in the corridor because the main surgical theaters were full. Juggling dwindling supplies of medicines, power cuts, and air or artillery strikes that shake hospital buildings, surgeons in Gaza worked through the night trying to save a constant stream of patients. This was soon after bombardment damaged the Indonesian hospital near the front lines, where Israel's military is pushing into the tiny, crowded Palestinian enclave, and with fuel supply for its generators about to run out, according to the doctors. Israeli tanks have entered Gaza, home to 2.3 million people, after 3 weeks of intense bombing that has smashed entire districts, and health authorities in the Hamas-run enclave say more than 8,500 people have been killed in Israel's assault, including 3,500 children. In northern Gaza, where Israel has ordered 1 million people to leave their homes and head for the southern half of the enclave, hospital conditions have been particularly tough, although a near-total communications blackout over the weekend has eased since Monday. Many Gaza residents fear losing touch with friends and relatives again under the bombardment. For emergency and medical services, the loss of phone and internet caused significant operational problems. On Saturday, Elon Musk said SpaceX Starlink would support communication links in Gaza with internationally recognized aid organizations. Israel has blockaded Gaza, cutting off electricity, and refuses to allow in fuel, saying it could be used by Hamas for military purposes. Hospitals have warned they may soon be unable to operate generators needed to maintain life-saving functions. Gaza's health ministry spokesperson said that main generators for both the Indonesian hospital and for Al Shifa hospital in Gaza City could be switched off late on Wednesday. Last week, the Indonesian hospital nearly ran out of fuel and had to cut electricity in much of the facility. Since Israel expanded its ground operations in Gaza on Friday, the northern district of Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun have been under particularly heavy fire.
West Bank in the northern city of Jenin, the Palestinian Health Ministry said Israeli occupation military has also stepped up raids early on Monday, killing 4 Palestinians. A ministry statement said the 4 were aged between 23 and 28, and another 9 people were wounded. According to the official Palestinian agency, with more than 100 military vehicles and 2 bulldozers took part in the raid, which took place in the city and its refugee camp. Military drones hovered over the area during the raid, while snipers were positioned on the building around Jenin's main hospital. Part of the hospital's perimeter wall was also demolished by military bulldozers. The death comes a day after 5 Palestinians were killed by occupation army during several military incursions into the West Bank. The ministry says nearly 122 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th. Back in Egypt, Al-Azhar on Monday praised the Palestinian resistance and Gaza innocent residents, including women and children, describing the Israeli military as a terrorist army devoid of moral and humanitarian value. Al-Azhar, the Muslim world's highest institution, said in a statement that Gaza's heroes deserve all the greetings and well wishes as they face with bare chests a terrorist army that saw no issue in bombing hospitals, mosques, churches, and killing women and children, as well as reporters and innocent citizens, medics, and so forth. The statement underscored that the UN chief, Antonio Guterres' brave stance, who called for the immediate stop of Israeli aggression against the Gaza's citizens. Al-Azhar also called on the governments of Arab and Muslim countries to help their brothers in Palestine and recruit their capabilities to support them. Yemen's Houthi rebels fired drones towards Israel today in a retaliation for its war against Hamas. Abdulaziz bin Hattur, Prime Minister of the Houthi government, said when asked about the launch towards Eilat on southern Israel that these drones belong to the state of Yemen. He added that the Houthis, who seized Yemen's capital in 2014 and control large swaths of the country, are part of an axis of resistance against Israel and are fighting with words and drones. Israel's military earlier reported a hostile aircraft intrusion and set off warning sirens in the area of Eilat, a resort town on the Red Sea. Israel blamed the Houthis for a similar drone attack on Friday in which its aircrafts intercepted hostile targets headed for southern Israel. 2 armed drones targeted Iraq's Ain al-Assad air base, which hosts U.S. forces and other international forces in western Iraq. The attack in the early hours of Tuesday did not cause casualties or damage. There has been an increase in attacks on U.S. forces since the conflict Since the conflict broke out on October 7th, and Iraqi armed groups aligned with Iran threatened to target U.S. interests with missiles and drones if Washington intervened to support Israel against Gaza. The group, called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, has endorsed Tuesday's attack. On Monday, 4 Katyusha rockets were fired at Iraq's Ain al-Assad air base, but it was not clear if the attacks caused damage or casualties. And moving on to the world of business and finance, world oil prices sank Monday as traders hoped a region-wide conflict could still be avoided. This is as Israel expands its ground operations into Gaza. Equities rose in Europe and on Wall Street as the sliding oil market lifted hopes that the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Bank of England will opt for no change when they announce their latest interest rate decision on Wednesday and Thursday, respectively. Here's the story.
Crude futures paired Friday's near 3% gains as Israel's military continued air and ground operations in Gaza. Ground battles raged inside the northern Gaza Strip, and Israeli tanks entered the southern outskirts of its largest city in the war against the Palestinian resistance group Hamas. Crude oil prices have slipped back below $90 a barrel, down from their Friday peaks. Much of the gains were on concerns that other oil producers in the Middle East might intervene in the crisis if Israel launched an all-out invasion, but with other nations staying on the sidelines, markets saw some relief. Israel's intensifying land and air campaign since Hamas' October 7th operations has heightened fears for the 2.3 million civilians trapped inside the besiege of the Gaza Strip, where the health ministry in Gaza said more than 8,300 have died, half of them children and women. Israel says more than 1,400 people were killed in the October operations by Hamas resistance, with more than 230 people taken hostage. Both the Fed and the BOE are expected to keep rates unchanged, which would provide some relief to investors, although much of the focus will be on commentary about the path for rates going into 2024. The decisions come 1 week after the European Central Bank left Eurozone interest rates unchanged last Thursday, bringing an end to a series of hikes that started in July last year. Policymakers had raised rates at each of the last 10 meetings as they sought to rein in soaring inflation, driven in large part by surging energy prices in the wake of Russia's military operation in Ukraine. But easing price pressures and signs of weakness in the economy prompted the ECB to halt borrowing costs.
The Bank of Japan further loosened its grip on long-term interest rates by tweaking its bond yield control policy against Tuesday, taking another small step towards dismantling the controversial monetary stimulus of the past decade. The bank's 9-member board also revised up its price forecast to project inflation well exceeding its 2% target this year and next, underscoring a growing conviction that conditions for phasing out ultra-loose monetary policy are falling into place. But the yen tumbled against the dollar after the decision as traders focus on the BOJ's dovish pledge to patiently maintain accommodative policy and forecast for inflation to slow back below 2% in 2025. But the BOJ redefined 1% as a loose upper bound rather than a rigid cap and removed the pledge to defend the level with offers to buy unlimited amounts of bonds. The decision highlights how rising global bond yields and persistent inflation are making it increasingly difficult for the BOJ to maintain its controversial bond yield control. The annual rate of inflation in the Eurozone dropped more than expected in October, the EU's official statistics agency said Tuesday. Consumer price inflation in the 20-nation single currency bloc slowed to 2.9%, the lowest rate since July 2021. Economic growth in the Eurozone contracted in the third quarter, according to data hit by the European Central Bank's painful rate hiking campaign and Germany's weakening economy, but inflation slowed in October. The EU's official data agency said the 20-country single currency zone's economy shrank by 0.1% over the July to September period, after recording only a 0.2% growth in the second quarter. Germany's economy shrank by 0.1% in the third quarter, while Austria also recorded a contraction of 0.6%. France, the EU's second biggest economy powerhouse, only grew by 0.1%, and Italy's economy stagnated for the third quarter. The global diamond sector is scrambling to get ahead of an upcoming G7 ban on Russian gems, with consumers and producers battling to manage ever more complex supply chains against a backdrop of sluggish demand. With direct sales of Russian gems already crushed by U.S. sanctions on Russia's state diamond miners Alros, the G7 is now in the process of thrashing out details of a further ban on indirect sales in its member countries expected by end October. But even before it is enforced, producers say Western customers have been shunning gemstones from Russia, the world's biggest producer of rough diamonds, by a volume with 30% of the market. The proposed G7 ban now risks further complicating supply chains at a point when demand is already under heavy pressure. With various proposals under consideration, the industry is currently debating how a diamond countries of origin should be checked, where it should be done, and what size of stones, rough or polished, should be part of the rule. In sports, Manchester City once feared a trip to Old Trafford, but painted the town blue once more with a 3-0 victory over a demoralised United on Sunday to reassert their dominance. A double from Erling Haaland before Phil Foden tapped home a third took Pep Guardiola's men 9 points clear of United just 10 games into the Premier League season. Not since United last won the league in Alex Ferguson's final season in charge in 2012-2013 have the Red Devils finished above their local rivals. The travelling City support taunted the home fans, with chants expressing the hope that the United's unpopular owners, the Glazer family, would remain for 10 more years. Initial optimism among the United fan base that the Americans would sell the club they have controlled since 2005 looks likely to have been misplaced. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has sent support and prayers to Liverpool forward Luis Diaz following the kidnapping of his parents in Colombia. Diaz's mother has been rescued, but dozens of soldiers backed by police are searching for his father. The Colombia Football Federation has also issued a further statement demanding that those holding Diaz's father release him immediately without condition. Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp said after Sunday's 3-0 home win against Nottingham Forest that preparing for the game had been the most difficult he'd ever had in his life. Liverpool's fifth straight home Premier League win of the season moved them 3 points behind leaders Tottenham. Lionel Messi won the Ballon d'Or for the 8th time in his career at a star-studded ceremony in Paris. Here's the story.
Lionel Messi won the 8th Ballon d'Or of his remarkable career at a glittering ceremony in Paris, while Spain's World Cup winning star Itiana Bonmati took the women's prize. For Messi, the trophy rewards above all else his inspirational performances at last year's World Cup in Qatar, when he dragged Argentina to victory, scoring 7 goals and being named the tournament's best player. It was the crowning moment of his astonishing career, and it allowed him to see off stiff competition, in particular from Erling Haaland and Kylian Mbappé, to take the award on the stage of the Chalet Theatre in Paris. It was a return to the French capital after his departure from Paris Saint-Germain in June and his subsequent move to enter Miami in Major League Soccer. Messi said on stage after receiving his award from David Beckham, the co-owner of the Inter Miami, that this is a gift to the whole Argentina team for what they had achieved. Messi dedicated the trophy to late Argentina legend Diego Maradona, who would have celebrated his 63rd birthday on Monday. Messi benefits from a recent change, which means the award is based on a player's record over the last season rather than over the calendar year. Mbappé was the star player in that team, scoring 41 goals, and was also the World Cup's top scorer with 8 goals, including a hat-trick in the final, which France lost to Argentina on penalties. Yet he fell just short for the Ballon d'Or, finishing third, while Norway striker Haaland came second after scoring 52 goals in 53 games for the Manchester City team that won the treble of England Premier League, FA Cup and Champions League. The women's prize seemed even more clear-cut as Bonmati was rewarded for starring as Spain won the World Cup in Australia in August. The 25-year-old midfielder was named the best player at the World Cup. Bonmati also starred at Barcelona, won the Champions League last season, and was recently named as the UEFA Women's Player of the Year.
And finally, in tennis, world number 1 Ariana Sabalenka said she feels disrespected by tennis's governing body and claimed the hastily built court being used for the WTA finals in the Mexican resort of Cancun is not safe. Sabalenka eased past Greece's Maria Sakkari 6-0, 6-1 in her group stage opener on Sunday, but that didn't prevent her from taking aim at the organization. Cancun was only confirmed as the host city of the prestigious season-ending championship on September 7th, after Saudi Arabia had reportedly been lined up to stage the event. Instead, the tournament has returned to Mexico for the second time in 3 years after Guadalajara hosted in 2021. Well, this brings us to the end of this episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more here on Nile TV.